This is Jonathan with Hartford Baptist Church, and welcome to James episode 18. We've about wrapped up James here. We're approaching the end. We won't quite get it today. We may finish up next episode. In today's episode, should be a pretty quick one. We're chapter 5. We're gonna go verses 7 through 12, and let's jump right in here. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remained steadfast. You've all heard of the steadfastness of Job. You have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. But above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or earth, or by another oath. Let your yes be yes, and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. All right, he's starting to wrap up his letter, and he's giving out a few of these. Just we'll call it short rant. They're not random, but verse 12 doesn't seem to connect with the rest of this passage well. So he's wrapping it up. He's giving all his last thoughts, his remaining thoughts. He's just kind of throwing those out at us. But he wants the believers, he wants the church, his congregation that got scattered throughout the Roman Empire. He wants them to know that they need to be patient. And he compares it to the farmer. Just as the farmer has to wait for the plant to be properly watered and for the fruit to develop before he can harvest, likewise we need to be like a farmer and be patient. Christ is going to come back when Christ comes back. It's on his schedule. There's no need for us to stress about it, worry about it, try to force it to happen. He's coming when he comes. But James wants to remind us that the judge is standing at the door in verse 9. Like, this could be at any time. In verse 8 he says, establish your heart, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Since we don't know when it is, you need to live your life, as James said, with your heart in the right place at all times. Be ready for that to happen at any moment. And we always need to refresh ourselves. It's easy to get kind of stagnant in our walk, or just kind of accepting of the world and the way life goes, and where we just accept things we shouldn't accept. But through constant scripture reading, constant prayer, we can keep ourselves sharp. And that's what James is encouraging his believers to do, to remain sharp. We see this elsewhere, and see it in Jesus' parables. We see it in Paul's writings. They as well encourage us to basically remain not only steadfast, but to remain alert. James is doing the same thing here. And then he mentions Job there in verse 11. Job, if you're most likely familiar with the story of Job, but if you're not, Job was a wealthy man. He was a righteous man too. So he wasn't like one of those evil rich people James was talking about. Job was one of the good ones. They may have been far and few in between, but they were out there. They're still out there today. And Job was certainly one of those individuals, and very faithful servant to God. Well, the story of Job goes, Satan had approached God and said, this Job guy, he's only faithful to you because you have blessed him with all this stuff. He's got family, he's got money, he's got livestock, he's got everything the guy could possibly want. Of course he loves you. Look at what you gave him. Why would he not love you? Take it away, and he'll abandon you. And God kind of took Satan up on that deal. And here we see, and through the story of Job, we see the purpose of temptations and trials, or temptations and testing. We see the different perspectives of God and Satan and how we line up with that. Now, Satan obviously was using these trials, or this testing, these temptations, to try to make Job stumble, to try to ruin Job's relationship with God, to make him apostate, he's that line seeking to steal, kill, and destroy, and he was after Job. God allowed this to happen, ordained it, if you will, this testing, as he does with all believers. But God had something much different in mind. His goal was not that Job should be destroyed spiritually or physically, but that Job should be purified. So, similar thing that James talked about earlier in this letter, that these trials were to purify him, bring him closer to God, to prove his faithfulness, to prove that his faith is legit, that his faith is real. It's not the same. No, it's not fickle. Job was a true believer, and true believers always persevere. God knows that, and God uses trials and temptations, testings, to help believers become more Christ-like. It's that purifying process, and so that's what happened. Job went through all these sufferings, lost all of his wealth, lost his family, lost his physical health. If you think Job's life was as bad as anybody's life could ever be, and he never abandoned God, never cursed God, remained a faithful servant. And it accomplished two things. Well, we'll say two basic things, two main things. Primarily, God was glorified out of the whole thing through Job's actions. Job remained faithful, and Job glorified God by remaining faithful. But also we see Job was ultimately rewarded for his faithfulness. Likewise, believers, when we suffer, and whether we lose financially, we lose family, we lose our health, when we remain faithful, we too will be blessed by remaining faithful. Now that may not be on earth. Unfortunately, you may not get these blessings on earth, but you will get these blessings in the afterlife. That is promised in Scripture. And also, God is glorified through all things work for the glory of those, work for good for those who love God. And certainly we see that play out in Scripture, and we see that play out in our lives, and it's going to continue to play out. So Job is kind of that model, where we see the purpose of testings and trials and such. Verse 12, though, he's changing topics here. But above all, my brothers, and this is Adelphoi, this could be brother, it really should be read brothers and sisters. So if translation says that, that's good for them. Then the net translation says that, says, above all, my brothers and sisters. Let me highlight that blue so you see that. That's a perfectly adequate translation here. It could be rendered as siblings even. But do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. Now, this swearing that James mentions isn't cursing or cussing, using vulgar language. That's what he's talking about. In context, he's talking about taking an oath, this promise, this vow. And he says, don't do it by heaven or on earth or any other oath or any other thing. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. This is really similar to something Jesus taught in Matthew Matthew chapter 5, starting verse 34. These words of Jesus, but I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than this is from evil. Or your translation may say the evil one, implying Satan. Let's see what the net does there. I'm not sure how they read there. And it didn't jump with me to Matthew. Okay, that's fine. Stayed in James. But let me get that back up. I wasn't done with that. Let's pop that up. All right. So here, we're going to work from Jesus' section. He gives us a little more details. And no doubt James is referring to this teaching. But Jesus tells us why we are not to make these oaths by anything in heaven or by the earth, because these are things that God owns. We can't make an oath on this. We can't promise on these things because these things aren't our things. And likewise, even with our own bodies, We can't. He says you can't make one hair white or one black. That's something God does. So even God ultimately has authority over your body. And Jesus is saying, just hey, just let yes be yes and no be no, just like James said. And what he's trying to convey here is like, let your speech be consistent. If your speech and your behavior is always consistent, you will find that you never have to take an oath, that you never have to swear by God, now that I'm telling the truth, because you have established this behavior. Now, one thing this leads to an issue is of the courts. Now, if you're called to testify in court, they make you swear an oath. They have an alternative oath, by the way. If you don't want to swear by God, they do. That most courtrooms will give you an alternative one. But here's what happens if you break this oath or vow. You basically you've appealed to the highest. You've appealed to God, or you've put this oath on what God owns. And when you fail to live up to your oath, you break it, you can't pay up because you don't own the earth. You don't own God. To make these oaths is, as he says, is from the evil one. Of course, we see in Scripture where Paul does seem to make several, we'll call it oaths or vows to reinforce, basically claiming that, hey, what I say is true. He does this in Romans 1:9, 2 Corinthians 1:23, 2 Corinthians 11:11, Galatians 1:20, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 5 and verse 10. And there's other places where Paul seems to be in the habit of doing this. And we also, in the Old Testament, we don't see any clear prohibition against taking oaths. God takes oaths. Well, of course, God can, because God is God and God owns everything, so he can do what he wants. But with us, where does this leave us? Should we be taking vows and oaths? I think we can, but we have to be really, really careful. I would caution and speak against anyone swearing upon God himself. That is really dangerous. But we can't ignore Jesus' teachings either, and James. Now that swearing by heaven or by the throne of God, which is the throne of God, or by earth. Perhaps your vow is based upon your reputation, something that you can, or your own character. That's something you can control. But that falls in the lines with let your yes be yes and your no be no. We're not appealing to someone else other than us that what I speak is truth. We're not putting that on anyone else. Our yes is yes, our no is no. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Don't appeal to someone else or something else in order to establish your truthfulness. Appeal to yourself. Appeal to your own character. Appeal to how you behave. Use that as your answer, which is basically what we see in wedding vows. Even people, whenever a groom and bride make their vows to each other, they make it before God, but they don't make it on God. Those wedding vows are on them. They take full responsibility. They don't push it off. Where I swear by the pastor, or I swear by the Lake of Michigan. They don't do things like that, and that's really the model we should follow. So any vows, commitments you do enter, let that be upon your own merit, what your character stands for, your name even. Let it be on you. Don't push your vow off or put your vow on anyone else, especially God. And we'll wrap it up there. And of course, we didn't talk much about verse 9, do not grumble against one another, brothers, that you may not be judged. That's kind of, James has already established that. We've talked about that stuff, how we interact with each other. So we're not going to repeat that. But as I leave you, if you haven't read the story of Job, it's a long one, but it's worth reading. Check that out. He's got his own book. But other than that, I'll see you next time.